Welcome students. In today's class we are going to discuss about the structure of the respiratory system. The respiratory system is concerned with the chemical process of oxidizing the food material, that is glucose, to produce the energy, and that energy is used by the different cells to perform the different life processes like reproduction, catching food, eating, drinking, and everything. So the respiratory system, since it is a system, it is made up of different organs, and today we are going to discuss in detail about the structure of those organs. In the process of respiration, we take in the oxygen and we breathe out the carbon dioxide. But that is quite a misnomer. We breathe in the air which is rich in oxygen and less in carbon dioxide, and we breathe out the air which is rich in carbon dioxide and less in oxygen. The first organ that is encountered with the breathing air process is the nose. Two nostrils are present as the outside entry passage of the nose, and two nostrils are separated by a cartilaginous septum. The cartilage is having two parts in the nose. There are the lower cartilage which is making the tip of the nose, and there is the upper cartilage which is making part of the nasal chamber. There are hairs present inside the nose, and those hairs are actually capturing the external dart or different dust particles that are entering into the nose with the inhaled air. The nostrils are opening into a pair of nasal chamber which is running throughout the length of the nose, and they are again opening into a common passage that we are going to discuss about in the next slide. The inner lining of the nose is adding moisture to the air that is incoming, and also there are some cells that are present on the inner lining of the nose are producing the mucus to trap the harmful particles. Another function of the nose is to act as the sensory organ of smell. There are some receptor cells that are present on the high up in the nose that can sense the smell of different substances, and there are nerves that are sending those sense organ or smell sense into the olfactory part of the brain which is interpreting that smell. The nasal chamber is opening into a cavity which is known as the pharynx. So pharynx is the common opening passage of the oral cavity as well as the nasal cavity. Now the pharynx is just a chamber, but it is divided into three parts. The part where the nasal chamber is opening is called the nasopharynx. Where the oral chamber is opening just below the nasopharynx is called the oropharynx, and the lower chamber of the lowermost chamber of the pharynx is called the hypopharynx. So these three parts is constituting the common chamber of the oral cavity and the nasal cavity is called the pharynx. Now pharynx is the common passage for food and wind. So up to this part the food and wind is having a common passage, but after the pharynx the passage or the mode of movement for food and wind gets different. So we can see in the picture, after the hypopharynx there is a tube-like structure that is going down. So that tube-like structure is having two parts. The anterior portion or the front portion is called the trachea or the windpipe, through which the wind goes down, and the posterior portion or the back portion is called the esophagus, or it is the food pipe. The windpipe or entrance of the windpipe is always closed by a flap which is called the epiglottis to prevent the food from entering into the windpipe by mistake. After the pharynx, the windpipe or the trachea is starting, But on the outer side of the trachea, or just at the entry point of the trachea, there is a cartilaginous structure that is hollow and that is just encircling the windpipe from all the sides. And this cartilaginous hollow structure is called the larynx. The larynx is also called the voice box or Adam's apple. As we talk, we can always put our hand on the neck portion and we can feel the movement of the larynx going up and down. So it is just present at the start of the trachea. As we can see in the picture, after the epiglottis there are the cartilages, and those cartilages are forming the larynx. There are total 9 cartilages that are attached to each other by muscles and ligaments, and that is forming the larynx. In between those ligaments, there are 2 ligamentous folds that are present at the middle portion of the larynx, which are called the vocal cords. The vocal cords are the 2 ligamentous folds that are producing the sound when air is moving through it, and for the movement of the air, the vocal cords are vibrated and the sound is produced. After the larynx, the trachea or the windpipe is continuing downwards and it is continuing up to the lung. Now the trachea or the windpipe is emerging from the larynx and it is going down up to the lung. It is just a pipe-like structure through which the air flows in and out. Now since the air always flows in and out through the trachea continuously, the walls of the trachea needs to be very flexible and very strong and supported. So it is protected by the C-shaped cartilaginous rings so that the walls are always distended situation and never collapsed. So the C-shaped rings provide flexibility and keeps the tracheal tube distended. After the trachea reaches the level of the lung, it gets divided into 2 primary bronchi and enters the left lung and the right lung. After some time, the primary bronchi, each primary bronchi into each lung gets subdivided into further finer branches which are called the secondary bronchi, or plural is secondary bronchus. And then the secondary bronchi is again getting subdivided into more finer branches which are called the tertiary bronchi, and tertiary bronchi one last time divides into more further branches and finer branches which are called the bronchioles. So bronchioles are the structures that are without the cartilaginous rings. So up to the tertiary bronchi we are having the cartilaginous rings that are used and that are providing the flexibility to the tube and keeping the walls distended. The bronchioles are such finer structures that the diameter is just 1 millimeter, and bronchioles after several subdivisions give rise to the alveoli or the air sacs, which are the end point of the respiratory system and where the main exchange of gas takes place. The tertiary bronchi, after getting further subdivided into bronchioles, and bronchioles after getting subdivided into the finest branches of the respiratory system, the end point of the respiratory system is reached, which is the alveoli. Alveoli are the tiny air sacs. Those are having the thinnest wall that will make the exchange of the gas very easy. There are blood capillaries surrounding the alveoli so that the gas from the oxygen from the alveoli present in the sac of the alveoli might enter into the blood capillary or the blood easily and go into the tissues. A thin layer of water or fluid is present around the wall of the alveoli, so the oxygen gets dissolved into the water first and then enters into the blood in the liquid form. Now we will see the main organ of the respiratory system that houses all these finer branches and alveoli, and where the exchange of gases is taking place. Those are the 2 lungs. So the two lungs are just air sacs or air-filled sacs or air-filled pouches, and they are spongy and elastic because the exchange of gas is always taking place, so they has to be elastic. They have the air sacs, bronchioles, blood vessels, etc. And the lungs are quite cone-shaped. They are tapering at the top and the base is a broad base. The number of lobe or number of divisions in the right lung and the left lung differs. The right lung is having 3 lobes. The superior lobe is the uppermost lobe, the middle lobe, and the lowermost lobe is called the inferior lobe. And the right lung, it is a little bit of convex at one end to house the heart at that point, as we can see in the picture. So that is called the cardiac notch. The notch that is present in the left lung, that is where the heart is present. So it is called the cardiac notch. The left lung, in contrast to the right lung, is having 2 lobes. One is called the superior lobe and another is called the inferior lobe. The covering of the lung is having a covering is present in the lung on the outside layer of the lung, and it is called the pleura. The pleura has an inner lining and an outer lining called the visceral pleura and the parietal pleura. And in between these 2 layers, there is a liquid present which is also called a surfactant, that is actually making the lung very elastic, and it is providing that avoidance of friction so that the lung can function properly. Now as we look at the inner lining of the respiratory tract. So the inner lining is starting from the nose and also going up to the inner lining of the trachea and the bronchioles and the tertiary, primary and secondary bronchiole, etc. So the respiratory tract starts from the nasal chamber and continues up to the alveoli. So whole of this passage, the inner lining of this passage, a particular type of cell is present which is called the ciliated epithelial cell. As we can see in the picture, there are the cells which are columnar epithelial cells because of the shape, but they are also ciliated because the cilia is present on the apical surface of those cells. Now this cilia is in constant beating motion. So whenever some mucus or any unwanted particle is deposited or is entering into the respiratory tract, the cilia is beating to move the particle out through the mouth or out through the nasal cavity. The inner lining of the respiratory tract is also housing some cells which are called the goblet cells. Those are producing the mucus. The mucus captures the different dust particles and some incoming particles, and together with the help of beating cilia, it is moved outside towards the mouth or towards the nose.